Today's webinar is entitled Think Outside the Box, Packaging, the Supply Chain, and the Environment. Our presenters today are Deanna Jacobs, class of '89, professor at RIT's Packaging Science Department and graduate program chair for Packaging Science at RIT. Our other presenter is Derrick Lawrence, class of '01, manager of packaging development at 7th Generation. Dee has taught in the field of packaging science for 28 years. She has served on the board of the Institute of Packaging Professionals, Monroe County Department of Environmental Services, the Recycling Advisory Committee, and is a member of the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, the International Society for Industrial Ecology, and the Technical Association of Pulp and Paper Industries. Jacobs was inducted to the Pi Alpha Kappa Honorary Society of Institute of Packaging Professionals and earned a Kudos Award for student support. She likes to quote John Muir, who said, "When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it's hitched to everything else in the universe. The same goes for packaging and its impact on the environment." Derrick is a graduate of RIT's Packaging Science Department. He is the manager of packaging development at 7th Generation, a consumer products company committed to being the most trusted brand of household and personal care products for your living home. Derrick has worked in the packaging field for 15 years for various companies such as Beiersdorf, Pepperidge Farm, and the Mentholatum Company. At 7th Generation, Derrick is responsible for managing all packaging development and bottle product development. Derrick coordinates all packaging improvements related to 7th Generation's 2020 sustainability goals, including achieving an average of 85% post-consumer recycled plastic content in rigid plastic bottles. Take it away, Dee and Derrick.
Hi, welcome everybody. Derrick and I are going to be talking to you today about the role of stakeholders. The life of a package is complex. There are many aspects to consider, such as purchasing, graphic and structural design, converting, processing, filling, shipping. There's research, capital investments, performance, marketing, merchandising, and sales. Everything has to work together in order to fulfill the ultimate goal of getting the product to its destination and final use intact. The size of the industry worldwide is about $500 billion, with 95% of that devoted to containers and the rest to machinery. The industries run from A to Z, from aerospace, food, beverage, medical device, pharmaceutical, personal care, the list goes on. Every stakeholder in every role, in every industry, has an opportunity to move the needle forward when it comes to environmental impact.
So, our goal is to minimize the impact of packaging on the environment. The global consumption trajectory remains largely unchanged, with about 2 billion people, more new middle-class consumers within the next 20 years. Water systems and other natural resources are stressed. Sustainable consumption cannot be achieved by a single person, department, or company. This requires innovation and collaboration across the entire value chain. Consumer behavior is still dictated by price, quality, and convenience rather than by origin of products and sustainability content. Many companies have bottom-line implications, such as reducing energy, water, carbon, but sustainability across value chains is elusive. There are insufficient incentives for business investment and collaboration. Environmental responsibility impacts stakeholders throughout the value chain, from extracting and sourcing raw materials through converting those raw materials into products, marketing and selling those products, distributing, selling, recovery, etc. Everyone has an impact. Many companies have created social responsibility or sustainability positions in their organizations, which is good. But to have a significant impact, companies really need to embed sustainability into the culture. It needs to be driven into the entire value chain so that all product development, services, etc., have sustainability as part of their decision criteria.
It is a very complex system with multiple inputs, processes, decisions, loops, revisions, substitutions, outputs, all striving to work efficiently and effectively to optimize the system. This is all about giving order to chaos. Finding order within the chaos takes knowledge of the issues at hand and how they are very fluid and very rapidly changing and evolving. Understanding how important it is to address these issues. To be willing to collaborate, because no one person, no one discipline can achieve these goals alone. Transparency and communication and sharing best practices. And none of this really can count unless you have the passion to actually see these goals accomplished. So how did we arrive at this place? Traditionally, production processes were represented by a linear value chain summarized as take, make, waste. We take raw materials, extract them, which is a disruptive process in itself, and they cannot be replaced even with the most robust recovery and recycling initiatives. We take those raw materials and we make them into finished materials and packaging, and this requires energy and other resources that once expended cannot be replaced. Waste occurs at every stage in some form, whether it's slag from iron ore extraction, trimmer scrap from a plastics production line, transport waste in the form of carbon footprint, product damage, transport packaging disposal, and then the packaging that each of us dispose of every day in our homes. The cost of waste impacts the environment, the economy, and society. This is not sustainable. Well, let's take a closer look at the waste that we can all identify with, and that is what we throw away every day. This is the waste not recovered through recycling. In 2012, we threw away almost 251 million tons of trash, represented by the green triangle in the graph above. And that's in the United States. That means each of us tossed about 4.5 pounds of trash per day. Of the 251 million tons, 86.6 million tons of packaging was disposed of, which is 65%. Think of that, 65% was disposed of. Only 34.5 or 35% was actually recovered for recycling. When we throw a package away, we are not just tossing the package. With that package goes all the resources, energy, and water that went into making it, transporting it, using it, disposing it, the carbon footprint, every burden. Once the package is thrown away, all those resources are lost forever.
And so all of these materials that Dee mentioned have different recovery rates and recycling rates, mostly due to the economics of recovery and what those materials can be resold for on the market. But even high-value materials are not recovered at 100%. So let's take some of these, for instance. 29% of steel is not recycled, 45% of aluminum not recycled, 65% of glass containers not recycled, 69% of PET bottles not recycled, and 71% of HDPE bottles not recycled. In our development of packaging at 7th generation, we strive to include as much recycled content into our packaging as possible. In 2013, we reached an average of 82% post-consumer recycled content in our packaging. Most of this material is high-density polyethylene, HDPE, which we use in our rigid plastic bottles for our laundry detergents, our hand soaps, our dish soaps, but which you can see has an extremely low recycling rate. We've also launched a 50% PCR polypropylene laundry closure, but getting this material is extremely challenging. As you can see, polypropylene didn't even make this list.
The current practice in handling our solid waste, this image shows, is least favorable. The pyramid represents the waste management hierarchy, with disposal, or in our case in the United States, landfill, the most predominant, the most practiced. The least practice is prevention and reduction. The post-waste reduction, this hierarchy is most favorable, where reducing is most favored and disposal is least favored. So what does this have to do with the stakeholders who are part of the supply chain? Well, everything. Reduction, the most favored option, can be addressed as early as raw material extraction and at every step of the supply chain. Every stakeholder at every stage can have a positive influence on this hierarchy. And what is the ultimate gain? Less stuff going to the landfill because there would be more recovery, reuse, and recycling practiced along the way. In a perfect world, there would be no waste. Take nature as an example. It thrives and flourishes. The plants and animals from birth to end of life contribute to recycling Earth's major nutrients, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Waste becomes a nutrient, not something that gets thrown away. The molecules remain in play. The molecules stay in motion.
So due to many driving factors, such as rising resource prices, raw material availability, environmental concerns, CO2 footprint, energy issues, water issues, companies have begun to opt for revolutionizing the supply chain, stepping away from the linear model that Dee mentioned earlier. Thus, the circular economy, based on the closed-loop environmental model, which strives to keep molecules in motion, which in general looks like this. So a design manufacturer to the retailer, to a consumer, to reuse, repair, recycling, into recycling, and then bringing that material back into play. Circular economy is a generic term for an industrial economy that is, by design or intention, restorative, in which material flows are of two types. There's biological nutrients, which are designed to re-enter the biosphere safely, and there's technical nutrients, which are designed to circulate at high quality without entering the biosphere. The concept cannot be traced back to a single individual, but has gained momentum since the 70s. The concept has been led by John T. Lyle in his regenerative design, Walter Stahel in his performance economy, McDonough and Braungart's cradle to cradle, Gunter Pauly's blue economy, along with others. The ultimate goal here being zero waste, which is the ideal we strive for. So our current technological abilities present us with the actual closed loop of today. This is what it looks like based on current capabilities. So we're pulling resources, whether it be from recycling or from our value stream, along with materials sourced from the ground. We're converting those materials, we're turning those materials into products, distributing those products, selling them at retailers, consumers bring them home, use them, and then there's the rebirth of the product. So collection, sorting, recycling. Hopefully we're keeping that package and material in play. This is a life cycle design diagram developed by Green Blue. Green Blue is an environmental nonprofit dedicated to the sustainable use of materials in society. We bring together a diversity of stakeholders to encourage innovation and best practices to promote the creation of a more sustainable materials economy. They are a parent organization of the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, which 7th Generation is a member. Sustainable materials management is predicated on life cycle design, which is a process for identifying the positive and negative impacts of the life cycle of materials as they're produced and consumed in an economy. So the value system equals supply chain plus value chain, and every stakeholder has a role. At 7th Generation, we have corporate goals that require effort from all stakeholders. Some of these goals are under the titles that we've developed here of Nurture Nature, where we want to create and use energy sustainably, source sustainably, produce zero waste, and decrease our carbon footprint. Transforming Commerce relates to being radically transparent. Then that's in reference to our stakeholders as well as our customers, our retail partners throughout the value chain. And we want to exert influence beyond our size. We want to enhance health by creating healthy products for healthy homes and building communities. We want to nurture thriving communities, and create a vibrant workplace. Sustainability isn't limited to packaging or green leaning companies such as ours. Conventional businesses are pursuing sustainability goals that will impact stakeholders throughout their businesses. Let's take Procter & Gamble, for instance. They have goals around powering all their plants with 100% renewable energy, using 100% renewable or recycled materials for all their products and packaging, having zero consumer and manufacturing waste go to landfill, designing products that delight consumers while maximizing the conservation of resources, or another large CPG such as Unilever, who has goals around improving health and well-being, reducing environmental impact, and enhancing livelihoods. And they're all being very transparent about their long-term goals as well as steps to get to these places.
The more knowledgeable stakeholders are about packaging, from raw material extraction to end of life, the more likely opportunities each stakeholder can identify and contribute to increasing the efficiency and effectiveness of the supply chain. More conservative use of materials, energy and water, better design, and increased recovery and recycling capabilities. All of these activities are paramount to keeping the molecules in motion. So what you, as stakeholders, can learn about packaging from cradle to end of life has the power to change everything. We've included a list of resources here where some of this information was retrieved from. And we'd like to thank you for sharing this time with us. And we welcome any questions.
Thank you, Dee and Derrick. And now, does anyone have any questions for us?
There's a question from Michelle that maybe, Derrick, you'd like to discuss issues around polypropylene.
Sure. As I mentioned, we recently launched our laundry closure, which uses recycled polypropylene, post-consumer recycled polypropylene, which I said was hard to get. So one of the issues around collection and sourcing of polypropylene is that in consumer products, which is typically what makes it into the recycling stream, they're typically small components, right? So from a packaging standpoint, a lot of closures, anything with a hinge on them is typically made from polypropylene. And our material recovery facilities in this country aren't necessarily designed to handle small products very well. So a lot of them have screens for sorting and human interaction with these things. So small pieces of plastic get lost throughout the process. So to get that clean stream, which we need to reprocess and use for our products, is really difficult. Most material recovery facilities have a 2-inch by 2-inch by 2-inch minimum on the plastic that they can capture.
We have a question from Patrick. What will be the greatest packaging game changer in the near future? Well, I have some ideas. How about you, Derrick?
Why don't you go ahead?
Okay. Well, I think one area is the development and exploration in nanotechnology. I also think that as we become more and more technically capable, especially with the development of the cloud, we're going to see some development in smart packaging that's more interactive. So those are just a couple of perceptions that I have. How about you, Derrick?
Yeah, I think this also relates to the next question from Jim about, or from Carol about bioplastics. I think bioplastics is a huge game changer for packaging. You know, the stuff that we've tended to focus on are drop-in resins that are made from bioplastics, so high-density polyethylenes or polypropylenes or low-density polyethylenes that are made from some bio stock, not necessarily things that are biodegradable or or are new resins entirely or new molecules, but things that we can drop into our current products without any impact to end of life, so that they don't impact the recycling stream, they don't impact performance, they just come from a different feedstock other than petroleum. So Carol's question is also about taking away from food supply. So at the levels that we're currently using for packaging, we don't typically have any impact on the food supply. It depends on what the raw material for these bioplastics are. In the U.S., corn is plentiful and cheap, so a lot of these bioplastics have started with corn. But the next phase in development of all those things is really waste products, so corn stover, so what's left over after you've processed corn for other things, for food, for ethanol, for whatever. So I think really that's the next verge for all of those products, and where we really can stop worrying about any impact on food.
And I'd like to respond to Carol's question regarding incineration and the option or viability of using volcanoes to dispose of waste, which is kind of an interesting idea, and it's not far-fetched at all. But the way I look at it is, if we are too efficient at disposing waste, then we're not going to find ways to divert it. I mean, people have come up with, catapulting waste into space and, various ideas, which are all probably very doable. But then it doesn't solve the problem of how can we better take that waste and keep the molecules in motion and regain the value from them by finding ways to recycle, because the planet is finite in its resources. So if we just keep getting rid of waste, we're just going to keep using up resources instead of trying to be more efficient about it.
Sure. There's another question here from Jim. There seems to be very little recycling of flexible packaging. Could you comment on the outlook for recycling there? So there's lots of effort in the industry regarding flexible packaging and its recycling. There's some pilot projects in California for ways of collecting those in blue bins and reprocessing those materials. We already have in the U.S. Wide availability of recycling of monolayer flexible materials, so single-layer materials made from polyethylenes, number 2s and number 4s. At the front end of your grocery store, in most places in the United States, there's bag recovery bins, right? So this bag recovery bin, you can put any number 2 or number 4 plastic in. For us, that would be things like the wrap that holds our diapers together, or the wrap that goes around our paper towels to hold that together. We really promote that as a way of recycling those materials. The more challenging products are things that are multi-layer laminates. So things that have foil layers and things that have PET layers or nylon layers. Those become much more challenging, and a lot of the work in the industry is going around how to process those materials.
If I could add something to that, I just read an interesting article about some research that's going on in recovering the aluminum from multi-laminate materials using a microwave and a type of pyrolysis. They're able to create some type of aluminum ash, and it seems to be kind of an interesting development that's going on there. There's lots of interesting research going on, and I'd like to think that all things are possible, maybe not today, but tomorrow, and that the research should continue. So.
And Mick had a question about other packaging materials replacing cardboard in the near future as a standard for parcel delivery. I think it depends on the product you're shipping. So corrugated material made from paper is an amazing resource for it, right? Paper is one of the things that drives the recycling industry. It has the highest collection rate from a packaging material standpoint, and it's really what keeps a lot of material recovery facilities profitable, and it's a great material for shipping things, right? So forest management has come a long way over its development. You can buy materials that are certified from certified forests that are managing those forests sustainably. So I think paper is a great option in both corrugate and folding cartons for packaging in general. I think, a lot of clothing manufacturers have gone to number 2 or number 4 bags, which, as I said a minute ago, are highly recyclable. So, there will always be developments there, but I don't think anything will supplant paper as the base material anytime soon.
I have to agree with that, but I think they'll always continue to do research on how to optimize the fibrous materials and create stronger, lighter, thinner packaging. So, but I think fiber is always going to be our basic packaging material that we use the most. Christopher is asking if there's any tracking of where recycling occurs and their success, and mentions Onondaga County here in New York State, which has a pretty reputable reputation regarding their environmental initiatives and their recycling. I know it's heavily promoted there. Tracking where recycling occurs, I sit on the Recycling Advisory Committee for Monroe County here in New York, and they do a lot of data collection. So I'm thinking it's probably, you know, communities do that, but you know, regionally, I'm sure they compile some of their data. I'm sure there's data out there, and I think it's going to become more pervasive because what they want to do here in Monroe County is flip the blue boxes and the large garbage cans so that the blue box, the size of the blue box becomes the garbage can, and the great big garbage cans now become the containers for curbside recycling. So they're watching their participation rate here in several different sections of the community to see how successful that would be and when they might be able to implement it.
Yeah, and there's national in industry groups, so and national and governmental groups that also track, you know, landfill and recycling rates. So like the Association of Post-Consumer Plastic Recyclers collects data and puts out some statistics on the recycling rates annually. The EPA tracks some landfill statistics. So those numbers are out there. Maybe not specifically down to the county level, but in general for the U.S., those numbers are out there.
Carol asked an interesting question. Forgive the silence, but some of these questions are very long. It takes a minute to read them. Basically, our views on TerraCycle's efforts to reuse materials rather than find other efficient ways of recycling. Do you think partnering with large brand owners like Kraft, Frito-Lay, et cetera, along with upcycling is more of an enabling motion as opposed to a permanent fix? Would 7th Gen ever consider partnering with TerraCycle? So let me respond to the first part, and maybe Derrick, you can respond to the second part. Mm-hmm. What I like about TerraCycle is their firm belief through Tom Zaki, who's kind of the icon of TerraCycle, to firmly believes that there is no waste, that materials are recoverable, recyclable, reusable, and that basically nothing should get thrown away. I know that's very bold, but as I tell my students, that's not a bad standard to hold out and try to strive for. If we have to throw something away, think about that. We are throwing away everything that went into making that package, let's say. So maybe the package did a really great job, and maybe it did it in a way of optimizing its performance with the least amount of material and least amount of space. But having to throw it away means that it might be the perfect package for today, but it's not the perfect package for tomorrow because we have to use that package and not throw it away. And that's TerraCycle's whole premise, is not to throw things away. And I think it makes you think boldly about things. They collect cigarettes. And people would say, well, why would you collect cigarette butts? Well, they compost the tobacco, and they capture the polymer in the filter, and they turn it back into pellets to be used in industry. So they're kind of asking us to think about doing things differently or thinking about things differently, which I think is very healthy. So as far as 7th Gen considering partnering with TerraCycle, what do you think, Derrick?
Sure. I think they do great work around materials that, their niche really is in materials that aren't widely collected in the Blue Bin program, right? We highly support the Blue Bin recycling program, and we try to engineer all of our packaging to meet those requirements to be accepted in most municipalities. We do have a few packages, mostly in the flexibles realm, that aren't recyclable, which we would always consider partnering with them, but our first and foremost goal would be to try and engineer ourselves out of those materials, and that's where we spend a lot of our time. There's a good question from Jack on have we done any LCAs to compare PCR bottles to multi-layer pouches? The answer is yes, Jack. I mean, there's lots of variables that go into this, right? The size of the bottle, the weight of the bottle, how much material you're shipping. Typically, this would be a liquid comparison, right? So in like a refill pouch for one of our hand washes or something like that. So we have, in our LCA analyses found that in general, once you reach a 30% PCR of your bottle, that's where PCR plastic becomes the better option from a life cycle analysis standpoint over multi-layered pouches. And most of that is due to end of life, right? There's no good end of life for a multi-layer pouch as it stands today, because most of those pouches have PET, polyethylenes, and nylons in them to protect them from shipping over time and not rupturing. Yeah, so we've done a bunch of work there. We have had pouches in the past, and a lot of our work is going into getting into a recyclable version of those pouches.
Heather is asking about how is industry addressing the possible health effects of contaminants from recycled feedstocks used in food packaging. All I can say is, and I don't have a huge base of information on this, is that the industry is very concerned about mineral oil being found in recycled fiber. So I know that they're aware that there are some issues. How it's being addressed at this point, I can't say, but I know mineral oil is definitely on the radar screen. And as we become a more global society and we start getting materials in from all over, part of this is going to go to transparency. Part of this is going to go to documentation, vetting suppliers. There's probably going to be more certifications, more evaluations that go on to vet the quality of the materials that we are now using, especially as they come in as recycled feedstocks.
Yeah, there's also from an engineering standpoint, we can sandwich those post-consumer recycled materials between virgin layers of material, right? So that a post-consumer recycled layer would never come in contact with the food, which is one way of helping to offset material use as well as helping protect the health of consumers in a food product.
Gabriel's asked a question that's of particular interest to me on how we can improve designs to increase recycling rates of packaging, or should we focus more on educating the consumer, and basically both. Educating the consumer is really key, because as we are all learning the breadth and depth of this issue and how we all need to be involved, consumers still may not understand why this is important. So education is always going to be a priority. As designers and improving design, I think understanding the whole life cycle, I think working within the team in collaboration, being transparent with your information, being open to testing and evaluation. And the simplest answer to that is, try to stay with simple materials, because simple materials are more likely to get recovered and recycled. But sometimes simple materials aren't the answer, and we have to think much more critically about how we use something that's more complex and maybe more difficult. So then you say, all right, then if I have to use this material that may not be recovered, let me use it to the best of its ability today and go for something that might be lighter or have more efficient cube or something like that, and try to address environmental concerns in other ways.
Mark had a question about recycling centers typically collecting numbered plastics, but he often sees packages with no number even though the plastic is likely recyclable. Is there an effort in the industry? Yes, there absolutely is. This is always a hot topic at conferences we go to. The Sustainable Packaging Coalition has a new program which has been gaining lots of steam. It's called the How to Recycle logo. If you search on H2R, and you'll see this now on all of our packages, and there's some big name consumer products companies also involved in this process, and it's got it's a standard set of icons to help consumers understand recycling. So you'll see a much better explanation than I'll give, but on their website, but it shows basically whether a material is recyclable or not, if it's highly recyclable in your area, or if you need to check locally. And it tells you what those materials are without having to use the number. So to tell you what the material is made from, whether it's recyclable and whether you need to check, or if it's accepted in most places in the U.S.
Yeah, it's a great example of a collaborative effort between an organization and brand owners, and everybody sort of being on the same page here and working together. So collaboration is very important.
There was a question from Patrick around the cost of this will be significant. Who's willing to pay for this? Customers, manufacturers, government agencies? I would argue that the cost of us not doing this is too high, right? We don't put any value today on the materials that we're throwing into a landfill, right? There's a tipping fee to get them there, but all of the embedded cost and the damage we're doing to the environment isn't necessarily captured. So I think it's going to be part of all of us bearing that cost, but the economics of those materials has to change, right? So it has to be cheaper for us to reuse those materials than to pull new materials out of the ground. So, you know, I think it's incumbent on all of us as sustainably minded people to help push our, you know, whether it be governmental, whether it's legislatures, or push through our industries to help change the economics of the business.
There's a question from Klabina on how should a retailer evaluate their supply and distribution chains when initiating the push towards sustainability. Well, that's no small undertaking. They have to work through their partnerships. They have to they have to vet who they're going to be working with from the source all the way through to the end. I mean, once again, the retailer also has to look at this as a system and holistically. They have to understand, everyone has to understand where everything came from before them, from the step before them. Probably one of the things they also need to do is to stay involved, and I know that retailers many retailers are very active in this, in understanding about materials, container systems, getting involved with ISTA, for example, to understand testing and requirements for moving product through the distribution channel. If a retailer is initiating a push, there are a lot of good models out there to work with. For example, here in Rochester, New York, we have Wegmans, who's been outstanding as far as being a model retailer, if you will. They are a grocer, and being very focused on implementing sustainability throughout their business, and also educating their customers about it. So that's where, you know, trying to do the right thing and also trying to inform people about doing the right thing is a true partnership there. Derrick, you have anything you want to weigh in on that?
Not on that one.
Not on that one? I always would say go for best practices. See who's out there doing some really good stuff and see what can be implemented.
Carol asks, what are some good ways to add value proposition through green packaging design, and is it possible to completely avoid greenwashing consumers? I think absolutely it's possible to avoid greenwashing consumers. I think, you know, what we like to talk about is transparency, right? And it's about being able to back up the claims you make with data and being willing to share that data. So if you're not as an organization, then you shouldn't be willing to make those claims. But there's no perfect solution out there for anybody yet from a packaging standpoint, right? There's always trade-offs in things, right? So, you know, one of the questions earlier was about flexible materials versus PCR in a rigid plastic container, right? So there are trade-offs in that, you know, the LCA work on a flexible, it's much lighter to ship. You get many more in a container before they're full. It's much lighter weight, right? So there's positives and negatives to anything, but you just need to share your data transparently, and that may be the right decision for somebody when they're comparing it to a virgin plastic bottle. And it may, you know, depending on how their formula compatibility is. So for one organization, that may be the right example. So when I answered that question about, you know, for us in the LCA work we've done, we have great compatibility of our products in post-consumer recycled resin. So for us, it makes more sense to use high values of PCR in our bottles than it would to use a flexible pouch for a liquid. But, you know, there's trade-offs for everything. There's also consumer accepted category norms for those things, right? So depending on the size of your organization and how much you can fund to try and change consumer behavior, that, you know, a company may be forced into the norms of their category for bottle size, from bottle shape, and things like that. And, you know, you do what you can within those constraints.
Yes, if you can't talk about it and share it publicly, then it definitely needs to have another look. Jack writes a question here, and it doesn't have to do with packaging, but it was an FYI that Keep America Beautiful did a study a few years ago and discovered cigarette butts were the biggest litter culprit. And I have to agree with that. If anybody out there has done any beach cleanups, my last trip to California for an SBC conference, we volunteered to do a beach cleanup, and it was absolutely amazing how many cigarette butts were present on the beach, and I'm sure you can multiply that by beaches all around the world. Absolutely amazing, and they're the most obnoxious things to try to collect up, too. They are really hard work. So, and there it goes to people not understanding what the impact is of throwing away a cigarette butt instead of disposing of it properly. Any more questions?
There's one from Brent around any recycling incentive ideas and trends for industrial packaging pallet purposes other than dollar credits, something other than a can bottle deposit model. I would say that the bottle deposit model is extremely successful in the states that it's in, right? So we talked about the average recovery of polyethylenes in the 50% range in places where there's a deposit. You know, we get over 90% recovery rate, and there are lots of industry groups and there's lots of governmental organizations, and let's say this throughout the world, that are working on different ideas on how to generate more material in the recovery system. So lots of EPR, extended producer responsibility legislation in Canada, in Europe, that puts the onus on the people who are putting the product out, right? So organizations like mine that are paying fees to governmental organizations that are promoting cleanup and organizing more recovery of materials. I would say less about incentives on the consumer side and more about fees and tariffs on the producer side.
Gabriel asks, Mark asks, some people think all items can be recycled due to the commingled and single stream craze. How would recycling of motor oil or antifreeze bottles be possible? Oh, that's really interesting because I know they're not accepted. I imagine what would happen to them is they would be diverted and probably sent off to be incinerated right now. We do have in our county one of the most unique eco parks in the United States, where they take items that you cannot put in your blue bins. So interesting things like bulky plastics, like do you ever drive down the street on garbage day, late spring, and people have their broken plastic lawn furniture next to their garbage cans? And it kind of makes me a little crazy, but those go to the landfill because they're not pulled and recovered for recycling. But the Eco Park will accept items like that. So they accept a lot of really interesting, difficult to recycle items, which to me says there is a stream for them, and hopefully we can grow it. So they even take styrofoam. Getting back to the question here, as far as motor oil or antifreeze bottles, I doubt they would take them, but I think I'll ask next time. But I'm pretty convinced that they would probably go off to be incinerated.
Mark asked for a link to the H2R website, which I just posted for everybody.
Oh, good.
There's a question about garbage incineration. So, I would argue that that would be a last resort for anything, right? That we should, if at all possible, re-engineer those materials to make it either recyclable or compostable or reused in the value chain, right? That burning those molecules to let that, even if it's to capture energy, is still not saving those molecules for us to use in our packaging and our products. So to me, that's a last resort. And if you're going to do it, you should at least capture the energy back through steam turbines or something like that. That incineration's not in and of itself an acceptable end of life for a product.
And then Carol asks, what is the best way to engage the children of consumers about the implications of packaging? For a generation that's growing up with online consumerism and Amazon, frustration-free packaging, how do you get them to put a value on something that seems like an immediate throwaway, such as the box it ships in? That's an excellent question, and that's a big challenge, and it's, the ongoing focus on education, consumer education, children education. My personal belief is that it all goes back to growing the appreciation for the environment. Well, they know and appreciate the significance of the world around them. They might not get why it's important not to throw things away. So that's kind of how I would go at it. I don't know, Derrick, you want to chip in on this one? I'm sure everybody has an opinion on this.
Yeah, I think, it's living with it from the start, right? When I see children or much younger people than myself that have grown up with recycling and blue bins and have had it emphasized in school, that they're often the ones pushing their parents to be more environmentally friendly. I think it's also incumbent upon us to have much larger social footprints around the way we talk about end of life of packaging and of products, and it's incumbent upon us as consumer products companies to let people know the impacts of the packaging that we ship in, right? Here's what our packaging is made from, here's how you can recycle it, here is what you save if you recycle it, and putting it in terms that everybody can understand, right? Making it a solution focused for them.
It's an excellent opportunity for someone like Amazon, for example, to even on their boxes be a little bit more obvious about how to dispose of things properly. Well, I think we're out of time. I do want to say thank you very much for participating. It was nice working with you too, Derrick.
You too. Thank you for having me.
Any additional questions can be emailed to ritalum@rit.edu or tweeted to @RIT_alumni with the hashtag #PoundMeRITWebinars, and we will direct your questions to Dee and Derrick. Note that all participants will receive an email from us in the next few days with a link to today's webinar recording. Many, many thanks, Dee and Derrick, for being our distinguished speakers today, and thank you all to all of our listeners for joining us for this webinar. Join us for the next installment of Me-RIT on Wednesday, February 11th with Lorraine Hems, lecturer in RIT's Hospitality and Tourism Management Department and certified sommelier, and with the Court of Master Sommeliers. Lorraine will be discussing the basics of wine and food pairing, what is different about dessert pairing, and will make suggestions for Valentine's Day. Stay tuned for an email inviting you to join the conversation. You will be able to register for this webinar and more at rit.webex.com. Thanks again for all of you